One evening Richard Cole, a rich CEO, was coming back from his office. On the way, he saw a little girl sitting and crying. She was alone. Richard stopped and looked at her. He asked softly, "Why are you crying?" The girl lifted her head. Her face was wet with tears. She looked weak and tired. She said slowly, "I lost my memory. I don't know where I live. I don't know who I am. I thought maybe you are my dad." Richard was shocked. For a moment, he did not say anything. He looked at her again. She was just a child, her hands were shaking, she had no bag, no phone, nothing to show where she came from. Richard asked, "What is your name?" The girl shook her head. "I don't remember. I don't remember anything." Richard felt something inside him. He had always lived like a businessman. Everything in his life was about work, meetings, money, and deals. But now, for the first time in years, his heart was louder than his mind. He could not leave this girl here. He sat down near her and said, "Listen, don't be scared. I will help you. You can come with me." The girl looked at him carefully. "But, what if you're not my dad?" she asked again. Her small voice broke his heart. Richard looked into her eyes and said, "Then I will still take care of you. I will not leave you alone." The girl's tears slowed down. She held his hand carefully. Richard took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. She felt a little warmer. He stood up and carried her in his arms. The girl rested her head on his chest. For the first time in his life, Richard felt something that money could never buy. A strange responsibility, a connection he never expected. He walked to his car. His driver was surprised to see him carrying a little girl. The driver opened the door, and Richard sat inside with her. During the ride, the girl stayed quiet. Richard looked at her and tried to understand. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why was she here alone? His mind was full of questions, but her silence was louder than everything. He gave her a bottle of water from the car. She drank slowly, holding it with both hands. She looked tired, but she also looked safe for the first time. Richard asked again, "Do you remember anything at all? Maybe a place, a face, anything?" The girl shook her head. "No. Just darkness. Then I woke up and I was alone." Richard thought deeply. He knew this was not something small. A child with no memory could mean something big, maybe even dangerous. But he had already made a choice. He was not going to leave her. "Don't worry," he said firmly. "From today, you are not alone. I will find out the truth with you." The girl looked at him with wide eyes. "You promise?" she asked. Richard nodded. "Yes. I promise." For a man who never promised anything outside of business, this was different. This was real. The car reached his home. It was a large house. More like a mansion. Richard carried the girl inside. The servants were surprised, but Richard said nothing to them. He took the girl straight to the guest room. He gave her a soft bed, clean clothes, and food. She ate slowly, looking at him every few minutes as if checking if he was real. When she finished, she sat on the bed and whispered, "Thank you." Richard asked gently, "Can I call you by a name? Until you remember yours?" The girl nodded. Richard thought for a moment and said, "I will call you Emma for now." She smiled a little. It was the first time she smiled since he found her. That night, Richard sat in his office at home thinking. He was a man who controlled everything in his life. But tonight, his life had taken a turn he could not plan. A little girl had entered his world, and with her came questions, emotions, and a mystery that he could not ignore. He looked out of the window, his mind heavy. But deep inside, he knew one thing. He would not let Emma down. And so, the journey began. The morning light filtered through the large windows of Richard's home. Emma, still curled up in bed, awoke slowly. The unfamiliar surroundings confused her for a moment. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, her heart racing as if she was waking from a bad dream. But this time, it wasn't a dream. She was still in the guest room of Richard's mansion. A place that felt both strange and safe. Richard was already up. He was sitting in his study, his eyes focused on a pile of papers. But today, he couldn't concentrate. His thoughts kept returning to the girl in the guest room. Emma. Her quiet presence, her sad eyes, and the haunting question she asked him. "What if you're not my dad?" He had promised her that he would take care of her, but could he keep that promise? Could he help her remember who she was? His life was about business, control, and strategy, but now, he had no answers. Just a little girl with no memory and no past. As he sat there, lost in thought, his assistant Sophie knocked gently on the door. "Mr. Cole, breakfast is ready," Sophie said. She hesitated before adding, "Is everything all right?" Richard nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, everything's fine, I'll be down in a minute." He stood up, adjusting his suit, and walked toward the guest room. He knocked softly on the door before entering. Emma was sitting on the bed, her small hands folded in her lap, looking out the window. She turned toward him when she heard him enter. "Good morning, Emma," Richard said gently. She nodded but didn't say anything. Her silence was starting to make Richard uneasy. She had hardly spoken since he found her. And he could sense the weight of her confusion, the fear she tried to hide. "Would you like some breakfast?" he asked. Emma looked at him, her eyes hesitant. "I don't remember the last time I ate," she whispered. Richard's heart tightened. He had no idea what this little girl had gone through, but he knew she needed more than just food. She needed reassurance, safety, and someone to trust. He smiled softly. "Well, you're safe now. I'll make sure you're taken care of." He extended his hand, and after a brief pause, Emma took it. They walked downstairs together, and Richard led her to the dining room. The large, elegant table was set for two, with fresh fruit, warm pancakes, and orange juice. Emma sat down quietly, picking up a fork but not eating. Richard noticed this and frowned. "You don't have to rush. Take your time." Emma looked at the food in front of her but seemed lost in thought. "Do you think I'll ever remember anything?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling slightly. Richard hesitated. He didn't have an answer for her. But he could tell that she was starting to lose hope, and that terrified him. He needed to give her something real. "I don't know, Emma. But I promise you, we'll figure this out together. I'll help you find your memories. Whatever it takes." Her eyes searched his face, and for the first time, she gave a small, tentative smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Richard sat down beside her and began eating, his thoughts still racing. How could he help her? Where should they even begin? After breakfast, Richard called his private investigator Daniel. He needed answers. He couldn't just sit around and wait for Emma to remember. The girl had no past, no family, and no history that anyone knew of. Richard's gut told him that there was more to this story than just a lost memory. But what was it? "Daniel," Richard said as soon as the call was answered. "I need you to find out everything you can about a little girl who might be named Emma. She doesn't remember anything. She showed up alone on the streets last night. I need to know if anyone is looking for her, if she's been reported missing. We need to get to the bottom of this." Daniel's voice was calm but concerned. "Understood, Mr. Cole. I'll get on it right away." Richard ended the call and returned his focus to Emma. She was still sitting at the table, playing with her food, her face blank. "Emma," Richard said softly, "I need to go take care of something. But I'll be back soon. Will you be okay here for a little while?" Emma nodded. But Richard could see the worry in her eyes. "I don't want to be alone," she whispered. Richard sat down next to her again, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone. You'll never be alone. I'll be back before you know it." He stood up, but just before he reached the door, Emma called out to him. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if no one comes for me?" Richard turned around, his heart aching. He walked back to her and knelt down in front of her. "Then we'll find you, Emma. We'll find out who you are. And you'll always have a place with me. No matter what." Emma's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She nodded, her small hands gripping the edge of the table, as she tried to hold herself together. Richard gave her a final reassuring smile before walking out of the room. But as he made his way to the door, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on his chest. He had no idea where this journey would lead, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to give up on Emma. The truth, whatever it was, would come to light. And Richard Cole was determined to be there for her every step of the way. Richard stepped out of his house, his mind racing. The more he thought about Emma, the more questions he had. Who was she? Why had she lost her memory? He didn't have the answers, but he promised himself that he would find them. He walked to his car, his driver waiting for him by the door. Where to, Mr. Cole? The driver asked. To my office, Richard replied. I need to make some calls. As he sat in the back of the car, Richard's phone rang. It was Daniel, the private investigator. I've got something, Mr. Cole, Daniel said, his voice low. We found a missing persons report from a year ago. A girl named Emma was reported missing, but there was never any follow-up. It's the closest match we could find. Richard felt his heart race. Could this be the same girl? He knew they had to investigate further. Where was she last seen? She was last seen in a neighborhood not too far from here. I'll send you the details. Richard nodded. His mind already working through the possibilities. Good. Keep me updated. The car pulled up to his office building, and Richard stepped out. Walking into the building with a sense of urgency. He went straight to his office and began making calls. Trying to get more information about Emma and the missing persons case. Hours passed, but Richard couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. He couldn't let Emma down. He couldn't let her be lost forever. At the same time, he couldn't ignore the way his heart seemed to care more about Emma than about his work. This little girl was changing everything for him, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. Just as he was about to leave for the day, Daniel called again. Mr. Cole. Daniel said, we found something important. There's a record of a woman who might be Emma's mother. She was involved in a car accident a year ago. No one knew she had a daughter. Richard's heart skipped a beat. Was this Emma's mother? And if so, where was Emma's father? Where can I find this woman? He asked urgently. I'll get you the details. It's not far from your location. But you should know, this is not a simple case. There's more to it than we first thought. Richard's mind was racing again, but now, he felt like they were getting closer to the truth. Thank you, Daniel, Richard said, hanging up the phone. He grabbed his coat and headed toward the door. He couldn't wait any longer. He needed to find answers. And he needed them now. When Richard arrived at the address Daniel had given him, he found himself standing outside a small hospital. He walked inside. His heart pounding. He wasn't sure what he would find, but he knew he had to be there for Emma. He approached the front desk and asked for information about the woman involved in the car accident. The nurse looked up at him, her expression serious. I'm sorry, but I'm not allowed to give out information. Can you please tell me what this is about? Richard didn't have time to explain. I'm looking for the daughter of a woman who was in a car accident here. Her name was, I think it was Clara. Do you have any records? The nurse paused. Then nodded. Yes, I can check. Just a moment, please. Richard waited, his mind spinning with thoughts of Emma, wondering if this was the breakthrough they needed. He couldn't help but think of Emma's face, her lost expression, and the question she asked him the night before. What if you're not my dad? Was this woman Clara her mother? If so, where was Emma's father? Why had no one been looking for her? The nurse returned with a file in her hand. I found the record you asked for, she said, handing it to Richard. The woman's name was Clara. She was in a serious accident, and there were no family members listed. But I'm afraid there's no mention of a child. Richard's stomach dropped. There had to be more to this story. Why wasn't Emma mentioned? Was there a reason? He thanked the nurse and left the hospital. His mind filled with more questions than answers. He had to get back to Emma. He couldn't let her down. When he returned home, Emma was sitting in the living room. Looking out the window, her hands in her lap. Did you find anything? She asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard hesitated for a moment before sitting down beside her. I found something, Emma. But it's not all clear yet. She looked at him with a mix of hope and fear in her eyes. Will I ever remember? Richard reached out and took her hand. I promise you, we will figure this out. You're not alone, Emma. And with that, Richard made another promise to himself. He would find the truth. No matter what it took. The days following Richard's visit to the hospital were filled with uncertainty. He hadn't found out much about Emma's past. And the more he searched, the more tangled the mystery became. Every lead seemed to end in a dead end. He felt frustration building inside him, but he couldn't stop. Emma needed him. Every time he looked at her, sitting quietly in the corner of the room, playing with her toys or staring out the window. His heart tightened. She had no memories, no family, no past. She was lost and Richard felt responsible for finding her. One morning, Richard decided to take a different approach. He could no longer rely solely on private investigators and hospital records. He needed to talk to the people who might know more. The ones who could help him understand Emma's situation. "Emma," he said as he walked into the living room where she was sitting. "I think it's time we try something else. We're going to visit the last place you were seen." Emma looked up at him, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "You think I'll remember something there?" Richard nodded. "I don't know, but we won't know until we try." Emma hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, I trust you." Richard felt a pang of guilt. He had promised to protect her, but he knew this would be difficult. She had no memories of anything before that night on the street. She was a child in a strange world. And now they were going to step into the unknown. They arrived at the neighborhood where Emma had been last seen. It was a quiet, residential area, far from the luxury of Richard's mansion. The houses were smaller, older, and there was a sense of stillness in the air. As they walked down the street, Richard kept a close eye on Emma. She seemed nervous, her small hand gripping his tightly. "I don't know if I can do this," Emma whispered. Richard stopped and crouched down to her level. "You don't have to remember everything, Emma. Just take it one step at a time. We're here together, and I'll be with you no matter what." Emma looked at him, and for a moment, Richard saw a flicker of trust in her eyes. It was small, but it was there. They continued walking, and soon, they reached a small park. It was the last place Emma had been seen, according to the reports. The park was empty now, with only a few benches and a small playground. But it had an eerie feel to it. The air was heavy, as if something had happened here. Something Emma couldn't remember. Richard sat on a bench and pulled Emma down beside him. He watched her closely, waiting for any sign that she might recognize something. But she just stared at the ground, her face blank. "I don't remember this place," she said quietly. Richard nodded. "That's okay. We don't have to remember everything right now. We just need to keep looking." They spent the next hour walking through the park, asking people if they remembered seeing Emma. But no one could help. It felt like they were running in circles. Just as they were about to leave, Richard noticed a small cafe near the edge of the park. The sign above the door read, "Jasmine's Cafe." He had a strange feeling about the place. Something that made him think they might find a clue there. "Let's check inside," Richard said. Emma hesitated but followed him into the cafe. It was cozy, with warm lighting and the smell of fresh coffee in the air. A woman behind the counter looked up as they entered. "Can I help you?" she asked, smiling warmly. Richard approached the counter. "We're looking for information about a little girl. She was last seen around here a while ago. Her name is Emma." The woman's smile faded slightly. "Emma, you say? I think I remember her." Richard's heart skipped a beat. "You do?" The woman nodded slowly. "She used to come in here sometimes. Not often, but I remember her. She'd sit by herself, playing with some toys. I never really knew much about her. But one day, she was just gone." Richard's mind raced. Did she ever say anything about where she was from? Or who she was with? The woman shook her head. "No, she never spoke about her family. She was always by herself. Like she was waiting for someone." Richard's gut tightened. This was the first real lead they had. "Did she ever mention any names?" The woman thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, I think she once said something about a man named Richard. But I don't know who that was." She seemed confused when she said it. Richard froze. The name Richard. Was it possible that Emma had been talking about him? How could she have known his name? He had never met her before that night on the street. But now, it felt like everything was connected. His name, her lost memory. And the strange sense that something was pulling them together. "Thank you," Richard said, his voice shaking slightly. "You've been very helpful." As they left the cafe, Emma looked up at Richard. "What's wrong? You look different." Richard took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "I don't know, Emma. But I think we're getting closer to finding out who you are." They walked back to the car, both feeling the weight of what they had just learned. The name Richard had come up again. But why? And what did it mean? Richard knew one thing for certain now. They were on the right track. The answers were out there, and he wasn't going to stop until he found them. For Emma. For the girl who had no memory, but who was slowly becoming more important to him than anything else. To the next morning. Richard couldn't shake off the feeling that something had changed. The mention of his name at the cafe lingered in his mind, nagging at him. How could Emma have known his name? Had they crossed paths before? The more he thought about it, the more questions he had. He sat in his office, staring at the pile of papers before him, but his mind wasn't on his work. It was on Emma. On the mystery of her past. Mr. Cole. Sophie's voice interrupted his thoughts. There's someone here to see you. Richard looked up. Who is it? A woman named Clara Miller. She insists it's urgent. A Clara. The name struck Richard like a bolt of lightning. Could it be the same Clara? The woman who had been involved in the car accident. He stood up quickly. Send her in. The door opened, and a woman stepped inside. She was in her mid-30s, with dark hair and a serious expression. There was something about her, something familiar. But Richard couldn't place it. Mr. Cole, I'm Clara Miller. She said, her voice trembling slightly. I need your help. Richard studied her for a moment. How can I help you? Clara took a deep breath. I believe you know my daughter. Richard's heart skipped a beat. Your daughter? Clara nodded. Her name is Emma. She's been missing. I've been looking for her everywhere, but I haven't been able to find her. And now? I heard you were the last person to see her. Richard felt a lump form in his throat. He had thought about this moment for days, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure how to respond. Clara, I don't know how to explain this, but Emma doesn't remember anything. She doesn't even know who she is. Richard said, his voice shaky. Clara's face paled. What do you mean, she can't remember? I found her on the street. She said she lost her memory. I've been trying to help her remember, but it's been difficult. Richard explained. Clara sank into the chair across from Richard. She's my daughter. She's all I have left. I need to find her. Richard was silent for a moment. Clara, where have you been? Why haven't you been looking for her? The Clara looked down, her eyes filled with guilt. I didn't know. I was in an accident a year ago. I was in the hospital for months. I couldn't search for her. And when I finally got out, I couldn't find her. I thought I lost her for good. Richard's mind was racing. You've been in the hospital. Clara nodded. I don't remember much about the accident. I was told I was lucky to survive. But Emma, she was just a little girl. I don't know how she ended up out there alone. Richard could feel the tension in the room. Clara, you need to understand. Emma is scared. She doesn't remember you. She doesn't remember anything. She thinks I'm her father. She's been through a lot. The Clara's face crumbled. What am I supposed to do? I've lost so much time. I don't even know if she'll ever remember me. Richard could hear the desperation in her voice. Clara, I'm going to help you find her. I'll do whatever it takes to get her back. Clara looked up, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you. As Clara left the office, Richard stood by the window, looking out at the city. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but there were still so many gaps. Why had Emma's memory disappeared? And why had she been so drawn to Richard? His thoughts were interrupted when Sophie knocked on the door. Mr. Cole, there's something you need to see. Richard turned around. What is it? Sophie handed him a file. It's a report on Clara Miller's accident. It seems there's something strange about it. Richard took the file and opened it. The report confirmed that Clara had been in a serious car accident a year ago. But there was something off about the details. The car crash had been labeled as an accident, but there were no witnesses. The police had never been able to explain what happened. Richard's heart sank. There was something about this whole situation that didn't add up. Clara's accident, Emma's memory loss, the missing time, it all felt connected, but how? Get me Daniel, Richard said, his voice sharp. I need answers. And I need them now. Richard's mind was racing. Clara's arrival had opened a floodgate of questions. There was so much he didn't understand. Emma's memory loss, Clara's mysterious accident, none of it made sense. Sitting in his office, Richard stared at the file on Clara's accident. The report was incomplete, missing critical details. The more he read, the more it seemed like someone had covered something up. But who? And why? He needed to get to the bottom of it. Richard immediately called Daniel, the private investigator who had been helping him with Emma's case. "Daniel? I need you to dig deeper into Clara's accident," Richard said, his voice urgent. "There's something strange about it. I need you to find out everything you can." "I'll get on it right away," Daniel replied. Richard ended the call and sat back in his chair, his mind running wild. Clara had been in the hospital for months after the accident. But how had Emma ended up on the street, alone, with no memories? It didn't add up. Richard decided to focus on Emma for now. He couldn't afford to lose her trust. He walked into the guest room where Emma was sitting on the bed, looking out the window. "Hey Emma," Richard said softly. She turned to face him. "Hi Mr. Cole, is everything okay?" Richard nodded. "Yeah, everything's fine. I just wanted to check in on you." Emma smiled weakly. "I'm okay. Just thinking." Richard sat down next to her. "About what?" Emma hesitated before speaking. "I keep having dreams. They're not clear, but there's a woman. She looks like me, but older. She's calling my name, but I can't hear her properly." Richard's heart skipped a beat. "What does she look like?" Emma frowned as she tried to recall the dream. "She has dark hair, and her eyes. I don't know. I think she looks like you." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. "You mean she looks like me?" Emma nodded, her face confused. "I don't know. I just know she's important. But, why can't I remember her?" Richard didn't know how to respond. For a moment, he just sat there, trying to process what Emma had said. Could the woman in Emma's dreams be her mother Clara? Or was it something else entirely? "I don't know, Emma," Richard said gently, "but we'll figure it out. I promise you." Emma looked up at him, her eyes full of hope. "Do you think I'll ever remember everything?" Richard smiled reassuringly. "I believe you will. And when you do, we'll be ready." Richard stood up and walked toward the door. "Rest for now. I'll be in my office if you need anything." As he left the room, Richard's thoughts drifted back to Clara. She had been in the hospital for months, and yet, she hadn't been looking for Emma. The whole situation was strange. And Richard couldn't ignore the feeling that something dark was lurking beneath the surface. He went back to his office and began reviewing the accident report again. But this time, he noticed something. A name at the bottom of the report, buried under a stack of other documents. It was a name Richard didn't recognize: Thomas Hill. Richard's instincts told him that this name meant something. He picked up the phone again and called Daniel. "Daniel, I need you to look into a man named Thomas Hill," Richard said, his voice steady. "He's connected to Clara's accident in some way. Find out everything about him." "Got it, Mr. Cole. I'll get back to you as soon as I have something." Richard ended the call, feeling a mix of anticipation and fear. He knew that this was just the beginning. There were many more layers to uncover, and he had no idea where this path would lead. For now, all he could do was wait. But the one thing he knew for sure was that he wouldn't stop until he uncovered the truth. 2. The next day, Daniel called Richard with some surprising information. "Mr. Cole, I found something," Daniel said, his voice low and serious. "Thomas Hill is a private investigator. But more than that, he has ties to some very unsavory people." Richard sat up straight in his chair. "What do you mean by unsavory people?" "I mean people with connections to organized crime," Daniel replied. "It looks like Thomas Hill has been involved in some shady dealings. I haven't uncovered everything yet, but I'll keep digging. But based on what I've found, I don't think Clara's accident was just an accident." Richard felt a wave of unease wash over him. This was not what he expected. He had assumed the accident was just a tragic event. But now, with Thomas Hill's name popping up, it felt like there was something much bigger at play. "Keep me updated," Richard said. "This could be the key to everything." After the call, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was closing in around him. He knew he had to be careful. The more he learned, the more he realized how little he truly understood about the situation. His thoughts were interrupted by Emma, who walked into his office, holding a drawing in her hand. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, "I drew something. I think it's a memory." Richard looked up, his heart skipping a beat. "A memory?" Emma nodded, holding the paper out to him. Richard took the drawing, studying it closely. It was a sketch of a small house, surrounded by trees. In the center of the drawing was a woman, Emma, perhaps, standing in front of the house, smiling. The woman's features were vague, but there was something familiar about her. "Is this your house?" Richard asked gently. Emma bit her lip, her brow furrowing as she looked at the drawing. "I think so. I'm not sure. But it feels like home." Richard stared at the drawing, feeling a chill run down his spine. There was something haunting about it. Something that made his instincts scream that they were getting closer to something. But what? And why did the house feel so familiar to him? "You're remembering things," Richard said, trying to steady his voice. "This is good, Emma. We're getting closer." Emma looked up at him. Her eyes filled with confusion. "I want to remember more. I want to know where I belong." Richard's heart tightened. He knew how important this was to her. But he also knew that the answers they were seeking might not be what Emma was ready to hear. "I'll help you remember," Richard promised. His voice soft but determined. "We'll find the answers together." As Emma left the room, Richard's mind was still racing. The drawing. The connection to the house. It all felt like a piece of the puzzle was slipping into place. But the more he thought about it, the more questions came to mind. Why was Emma remembering now? And why was the house so important? He felt a sudden urge to revisit the location of the accident. Maybe it wasn't just the details about Clara's accident that needed to be uncovered. Maybe the key to everything was hidden in the past. In the very place where everything had started. Richard quickly made a decision. He needed to go to the location where Clara had crashed. There was something there. Something he had missed before. He didn't know what, but he knew he had to go. Later that afternoon, Richard arrived at the crash site. It was a remote, wooded area. Far away from the bustling city. The road was narrow and twisted, making it an easy place for something bad to happen. The only thing that stood out was an old, rusted sign marking the entrance to the woods, as though the area was forgotten by time. He stepped out of the car, looking around. The place felt abandoned. No one was here, and the air was thick with silence. The crash had happened right here, just a few hundred feet away from where Richard stood. There was no sign of the wreckage now, just an empty patch of dirt and a few scattered branches. Richard walked toward the spot where the car had overturned. The ground was still uneven, and there were faint tire marks in the dirt, barely visible after the passage of time. He bent down, inspecting the area. But there was nothing that stood out to him. Just as he was about to turn back, something caught his eye. A small piece of paper sticking out from under a rock. Richard picked it up, carefully unfolding it. It was a photograph. The image was old, its edges worn, but it was clear enough. In the photo, there was a woman standing in front of a house. The house in the photograph was unmistakably the same as the one Emma had drawn. Richard's breath caught in his throat. The woman in the photo was Clara. And standing beside her, holding her hand, was a young girl. Emma. Richard stood frozen, staring at the photograph in his hand. The image was clear enough: Clara, and a younger version of Emma standing in front of a house. The house in the photograph was identical to the one Emma had drawn. And that undeniable connection made Richard's heart race. The past was starting to blur with the present. He quickly slipped the photograph into his jacket pocket. His mind already racing. Why was this photo here, and what did it mean for Emma? Could it be that the key to her memory was hidden right here in this very spot? Richard glanced around one last time, the forest surrounding him feeling more ominous now than it had before. His thoughts were interrupted by a car's engine rumbling in the distance. He turned and saw a black SUV pull up. Daniel stepped out, his face serious. "You were right to come here," Daniel said, handing Richard a folder. "I've been digging into Thomas Hill. It's worse than we thought." Richard took the folder, flipping it open. Inside were detailed reports, some of them redacted, others filled with alarming information. Hill was connected to several criminal organizations, and his name had surfaced in multiple illegal dealings. Things much worse than a simple car accident. Richard's stomach tightened. So, Clara's accident wasn't just an accident. No. Daniel replied, shaking his head. It looks like Clara was targeted. The crash wasn't random. It's part of something much bigger. And I think Emma knows more than we realized. Richard's mind reeled. Was Emma involved in this somehow? Had she witnessed something at that young age that she didn't remember? What does Thomas Hill have to do with all of this? Richard asked, his voice sharp. Daniel paused. I'm still working on that. But I found out Hill was hired by someone close to Clara. Someone in her life who had a lot to lose. Whoever it is. They don't want this story getting out. Richard's jaw tightened. There was so much they didn't know, and Clara's secrets were just beginning to surface. Clara's been hiding something, Daniel continued. Maybe even from herself. And Emma. She might be the missing link to it all. Richard stood silent for a moment. The photograph in his pocket seemed to weigh a ton. He had promised Emma he would help her, but now it was clear the truth was darker and more dangerous than he had imagined. I need to talk to Clara, Richard said finally, his voice resolute. I need her to tell me everything. Later that evening. Clara arrived at Richard's mansion. She looked tired, her eyes swollen from lack of sleep, and she seemed as though she hadn't been eating well. Richard greeted her at the door, his expression serious. Clara, he said, leading her to the study. I need to know everything. About the accident. About Thomas Hill. And about Emma. Clara sat down slowly, her hands trembling. I don't know what you mean, she said quietly. I've told you everything. Richard slammed his hand on the table, startling her. You're lying to me, Clara. I have proof. And if you don't tell me the truth, I will find out. Clara flinched but held his gaze. I'm not lying, Richard. But I don't know what you want from me. I was in an accident. I lost months of my life. I've been looking for Emma ever since. I swear, I'm not hiding anything. Then why was Thomas Hill involved? Why was Emma's memory erased? And why does this photo of you and her show up at the crash site? Richard asked, his voice steady, but his eyes hard. Clara's face went pale. Where did you find that? Richard didn't answer. He just stared at her, waiting for her to speak. After a long silence, Clara finally spoke, her voice shaking. I don't remember everything, Richard. The accident, it was no accident. It was planned. Hill was hired by someone to make sure I didn't remember anything. And Emma knew something. She saw something, but I don't know what. I couldn't protect her. I couldn't protect myself. Richard's heart sank. Who hired him, Clara? Who wanted to hurt you? Clara looked up, her eyes filled with tears. I don't know. But I know they will never stop until they finish what they started. They'll come after you too. Richard's mind raced. Clara's fears were not unfounded. Someone wanted this secret buried, and Emma was right in the center of it all. I'll protect you both, Richard said firmly. But I need you to trust me. We can't keep hiding from this. Clara nodded slowly, her face drawn with worry. I trust you. But Emma, she's in danger. We all are. Richard knew then that this was no longer just about finding answers. It was about survival. The truth was out there. But getting to it would come at a cost. And he wasn't sure who would survive in the end. The next morning. Richard couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. He had hoped Clara's confession would bring some clarity. But instead, it opened even more questions. The truth about Thomas Hill, Clara's accident, and Emma's hidden memories was becoming a labyrinth of shadows. Richard sat in his study, staring at the photograph of Clara and Emma. His fingers traced the edges of the worn paper. What was it about this house, this photograph, that felt like the missing piece? Why was this image at the crash site? As he pondered, the phone rang, snapping him back to reality. Mr. Cole. Daniel's voice came through the line, sounding urgent. I have an update on Thomas Hill. Richard sat up straight. What have you found? I did some digging into Hill's connections. Daniel began. It's worse than we thought. Hill isn't just working for random criminals. He's tied to a larger network. This goes beyond Clara. Richard's stomach churned. How? Daniel hesitated. Hill is working for someone high up, someone in a position of power. I'm still trying to figure out exactly who, but this person. They want something from Clara. Something Emma knows. The accident was just the beginning. Richard's mind was racing. This is bigger than we thought. Much bigger. Daniel agreed. And I have reason to believe the person behind all this is closer to Clara than we realized. Maybe even someone she trusted. Richard's mind flashed to Clara's family. Her ex-husband. A close friend. But the pieces weren't fitting. I need you to keep digging, Daniel. Richard said, his voice sharp. And let me know if you find anything else. I will. Be careful, Mr. Cole. This is dangerous. Later that afternoon, Richard stood by the window in his office, lost in thought. The past few days had been a blur of shocking revelations and dangerous unknowns. He needed to take control, to stop reacting and start acting. But where to start? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Emma, looking a little nervous. Mr. Cole? She asked, her voice uncertain. Can we talk? Richard smiled gently. Of course, Emma. What's on your mind? She stepped inside and sat down, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. I've been thinking, about my dreams. About the woman in them. Richard sat down beside her. Tell me about the dreams, Emma. You've been having them for a while now, right? Emma nodded, her eyes distant as if the memories were just within reach. I see the house. The one in my drawing. And there's a woman. She's always calling my name, but I can't hear her clearly. I think she's trying to tell me something important. But I don't know what. Richard's heart skipped a beat. Do you remember anything else about her? Her voice. Her face. Emma's brow furrowed as she tried to recall more. She looks like me, but older. And, there's something about her eyes. I think she's sad. Richard took a deep breath. Emma, what if I told you that woman is your mother? Emma's eyes widened in surprise. My mom. But I don't remember her. I don't even know what she looks like. Richard reached out and gently held her hand. It's okay. You don't need to remember everything right now. But I need you to trust me. That woman you see in your dreams. She's someone important, and we'll find out who she is together. Emma looked at him with uncertainty in her eyes but nodded slowly. Okay, Mr. Cole. I trust you. Richard gave her a reassuring smile. You're not alone anymore, Emma. I promise you that. But as he watched Emma leave the room, Richard's heart felt heavy. Emma was starting to piece things together, but how much of it could she handle? The truth was closing in on all of them. And he wasn't sure they were ready for what would come next. Later that evening, Richard received an unexpected visitor. It was Clara. Looking more distressed than ever. Richard, she said, breathless. You have to stop looking into this. You have to stop before it's too late. Richard narrowed his eyes. What do you mean, Clara? I'm not stopping until I find out the truth. Clara shook her head, panic in her eyes. I'm telling you, they'll come for Emma. They'll come for both of you if you keep pushing. You don't understand the danger you're in. Richard stood up, his expression hardening. You're not telling me everything, Clara. I know this goes deeper than you're letting on. Who are these people? Who's behind this? Clara hesitated. Her voice trembling. I can't say, not yet. But trust me, Richard. If you keep digging, it's not just your life that's at risk. It's Emma's. You don't know what they're capable of. Richard's heart raced. Was Clara protecting someone? Or was she afraid of something? Someone more dangerous than he could imagine. I can't stop Clara. Richard said quietly, his voice filled with resolve. I won't stop until I get the answers. Clara's face fell, her eyes filled with fear. Then you'll have to face the consequences. Richard didn't know what that meant, but he knew one thing for sure. The deeper he went, the more dangerous this was becoming. But there was no turning back now. Richard couldn't sleep. The weight of Clara's words haunted him. Face the consequences. What did she mean? And why was she so desperate to stop him from digging deeper? Clara wasn't just afraid, she was terrified. That fear had to be based on something real. As the early morning hours crept by, Richard sat in his office, sorting through the files on his desk. There had to be something he missed, something that connected all the dots. Thomas Hill, Clara's accident, Emma's missing memories. It all pointed in one direction. But what? His phone rang, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was Daniel. "Mr. Cole." Daniel's voice was grim. "I have a breakthrough on the investigation. You need to hear this." Richard stood up instantly, his pulse quickening. "Go ahead. It's about Thomas Hill." Daniel continued. "We've found something strange. Hill has connections to a private security firm, and it's not just any firm. This one specializes in high-profile individuals, people with secrets. The kind of secrets that could ruin lives." Richard's mind raced. "And Clara? Does this firm have anything to do with her?" "Not just Clara," Daniel replied. "There's more. The firm has been hired by someone very high up, someone with a lot to lose. And it looks like they're willing to do whatever it takes to keep Clara quiet." Richard's chest tightened. "Who are they?" Daniel paused. "I don't have the name yet. But we're getting closer, and there's one more thing. Emma's memories. They're not erased. They're suppressed. Someone wanted her to forget. And whoever that was, they're still watching." Richard's thoughts swirled. Suppressed memories. It all made sense now. Emma's dreams, her drawings, they were fragments of something buried deep within her mind. And someone didn't want her to remember. But why? "I need you to find out everything about this security firm, Daniel," Richard said urgently. "And if you find anything on the person who hired them, you need to let me know immediately." "I'm on it, Mr. Cole. But be careful. This is bigger than we thought." Later that afternoon, Richard walked through the halls of his mansion, his mind still racing. Emma was in her room, quiet as usual. But he couldn't help but feel the weight of what he was about to do. The truth was closing in. But with it came danger. Danger that could threaten the life of the only family he had left. Richard knocked softly on Emma's door. "Emma, can I come in?" A small voice answered from inside. "Yes, Mr. Cole." Richard stepped in, finding Emma sitting on the bed, a sketchbook in her lap. Her drawings had become more detailed over the past few days. The house, the woman, and now, there was a new image. A shadowed figure standing at the edge of a forest. Watching. Emma's drawings were starting to tell a story, one that didn't need words. "Emma," Richard began softly, sitting beside her. "I need you to tell me everything you remember about the woman in your dreams. Anything that stands out." Emma looked at him, her brow furrowing. "I told you everything. She's sad. She calls me by my name. But, there's something else, Mr. Cole. There's a man in my dreams too." Richard's heart skipped a beat. "A man? What does he look like?" Emma bit her lip, her eyes scanning the page. "He's tall. Dark hair. He doesn't say anything, but I know he's bad. He's always watching." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. The figure Emma described wasn't just a figment of a child's imagination. It sounded like the same shadow that had been lurking behind Clara's accident. "Do you remember anything else? Anything at all?" Richard asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Emma shook her head slowly. "No. It's like I can't reach him. He's always just there. Watching." Richard stood up, his thoughts darkening. "It's okay, Emma. We're going to figure this out. But you're not alone. Not anymore." Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with both hope and fear. "Do you think I'll remember soon?" "I don't know," Richard said honestly. "But I won't stop until we find the answers. I promise you that." Later that evening, as Richard prepared for bed, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. He picked it up, his eyes scanning the message. It was from Daniel. "I found the name. It's not just anyone. It's someone you know. Someone close to Clara. Be careful." Richard's heart stopped. Someone he knew. Who could it be? Without wasting a second, he called Daniel back. "Who is it?" Richard demanded. Daniel's voice was tense. "It's Greg Hill. Thomas's brother." Richard's blood ran cold. Greg Hill. The same man who had been involved in Clara's life years ago. The man with the power to ruin everything. Richard's mind was racing. How is he involved? Greg Hill is the one who hired the security firm. He's the one pulling the strings. And from what I can gather, he's not just interested in Clara's silence. He wants Emma. He needs her to stay quiet, to keep whatever she knows hidden. Richard's jaw tightened. So it's Greg Hill who's behind this. He's the one who erased Emma's memories. Daniel's voice was heavy with concern. It looks like it. And he's dangerous, Richard. You need to be prepared. This is bigger than any business deal you've ever faced. Richard hung up the phone, his mind focused. It all made sense now. Greg Hill was not just a shadow in the background. He was the mastermind behind the conspiracy. And he wasn't going to stop until Emma's memories stayed locked away for good. Richard couldn't shake the weight of the revelation. Greg Hill. It felt like a punch to the gut. For years, Richard had known Greg as a friendly face in business, a man with connections and charm. But now, that man was a threat. A man willing to go to any lengths to protect his secrets. And his connection to Clara only made everything worse. He walked around the house, his mind heavy. The walls of this mansion, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a prison. Every room, every shadow, seemed to hide something. And Emma was at the heart of it all. Richard needed answers. But more importantly, he needed to protect her. That night, as he sat in his study, his phone rang again. It was Daniel. Mr. Cole. Daniel's voice was low, almost urgent. You need to be careful. Greg Hill knows you're on to him. I'm tracking his movements, but he's getting more paranoid. He's trying to cover his tracks. Richard's pulse quickened. How do you know that? Daniel hesitated. I've seen the patterns. Hill has been moving his assets, changing the companies he's linked to. He's preparing for something. I don't know what yet, but it's not good. Richard's hands clenched into fists. What about the security firm? Any new leads? Nothing concrete yet, Daniel replied. But there's something else. Hill's been in contact with someone from Clara's past. Someone who might know more about Emma's accident. If we can find this person, we might have a breakthrough. Richard leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they didn't make a clear picture. Every new discovery only raised more questions. Who was Clara hiding? And why was Greg Hill so desperate to control everything? I need you to find this person, Richard said firmly. As soon as possible. I will. Daniel confirmed. But be careful. Hill has eyes everywhere. He won't hesitate to take action if he feels threatened. Richard hung up the phone, his mind racing. The walls were closing in faster than he anticipated. He needed to protect Emma, but he also needed to uncover the truth. The next day, Richard spent hours in his office, meeting with his team and making calls to ensure the safety of his company. But his thoughts kept returning to Emma. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was at the center of something much bigger. When he finally went upstairs to check on her, he found her sitting in her room, staring out of the window. Her back was turned to him, but he could feel the weight of her sadness even from a distance. Emma, he called softly. She turned, her eyes red from crying. Mr. Cole. I had another dream. Richard's heart sank. The dreams were becoming more frequent, and now they seemed to be more vivid. The woman in her dreams, the man, every time Emma spoke of them, it felt like they were coming closer. What happened in the dream this time? Richard asked. Sitting down beside her, Emma wiped her eyes and hugged her knees to her chest. I saw the woman again. But this time, she was different. She wasn't calling my name. She was screaming. She was running, like she was trying to escape. Richard's chest tightened. Escape from what? I don't know. Emma whispered, shaking her head. But there was a man chasing her. And he looked angry. He was holding something, like a picture. And when I looked at it, I saw my face. Richard's blood ran cold. Emma, are you sure? Emma nodded slowly, her eyes wide with fear. Yes. It was me. But I don't know why. I don't know why he was after her. Richard's mind raced. This was it. This was the key. The man in Emma's dreams was the same man behind the conspiracy. The picture, the one he had been searching for, was connected to Clara and Emma. The truth was close. And yet, it was slipping further away with every passing moment. I promise you, Emma. Richard said softly, taking her hand in his. We're going to figure this out. You're not alone. I won't let anyone hurt you. Emma looked at him, her small face full of trust. I believe you, Mr. Cole. That evening Richard received a call from Daniel. "I found her," Daniel said quickly, his voice filled with urgency. "Clara's old friend. Her name is Lucy Hale. She was the last person to see Clara before the accident. And she might know something about what happened to Emma." Richard stood up, a feeling of hope rising in his chest. "Where can I find her?" Daniel's voice was tense. "I don't know. She's gone into hiding, Richard. She's afraid. But I'm tracking her. I'll have a location soon." Richard's heart pounded. This could be the breakthrough he needed. But it was also risky. If Greg Hill was already onto him, then Lucy Hale's life, and Emma's, were in even greater danger. "I'll be ready," Richard said. "Find her, Daniel. And don't let anyone else get in the way." The call ended, and Richard stood still for a moment. He had made a promise to Emma. He had made a promise to Clara. And now, he was about to make another promise to himself. He wouldn't rest until the truth came to light. Later that night, Richard stood in front of his mirror, looking at his reflection. The man he saw wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was a protector, a father figure to a girl who had lost everything. And he was about to face a battle that could destroy him if he wasn't careful. But he couldn't back down. For Emma, for Clara, for the truth. The next morning. Richard's phone rang early. His sleep had been restless, plagued by visions of shadows and whispers. Visions of people he couldn't place, but felt deeply connected to. His gut told him the truth was near, but it also told him danger was closing in. "Mithrek. Cole." Daniel's voice crackled through the phone. "I've located Lucy Hale. She's staying at a small cabin outside the city. It's isolated. No one knows she's there." Richard's heart raced. "Get me the address. I'm leaving now." "I'll send it over," Daniel replied. "But be careful. Greg Hill's people are on the move. If they find her first, I won't let that happen." Richard cut him off firmly. "I'll protect her. Just keep me updated." Richard hung up and immediately began preparing. He couldn't afford to waste time. Emma was safe for now, but the closer he got to the truth, the more vulnerable she became. He had to move quickly before Greg Hill could act. An hour later, Richard arrived at the cabin. It was tucked away in a forested area, hidden from view. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind, and the occasional bird call. The world felt eerily quiet. Richard parked the car at a distance and approached on foot, his senses alert. He knew this wasn't just about finding Lucy Hale. It was about unraveling the tangled web that Greg Hill had set up. He reached the cabin's front door and knocked firmly. There was a brief silence, followed by the sound of footsteps approaching from inside. The door creaked open to reveal a woman in her late 30s, her face drawn with worry and exhaustion. Her eyes were wary but held a flicker of recognition when she saw Richard. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, stepping aside. "I didn't think you'd come." "Lucy Hale?" Richard asked, his voice low but steady. "Yes," she replied. "Please come in." Richard stepped inside. The cabin was simple, modest even, with just a few pieces of furniture, and a fireplace that had long since gone cold. It was clear that Lucy had been living in isolation for quite some time. Lucy sat down on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked at Richard, her eyes searching his face. "I don't have much to offer," she said quietly. "But I know why you're here. You want to know what happened to Emma. You want to know what happened to Clara." Richard didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need the truth, Lucy. Everything you know." Lucy took a deep breath. "It's not easy to talk about. Clara was a good friend, but we both made mistakes. Big ones. We got involved with people who were dangerous, and it all spiraled out of control. Greg Hill, he wasn't who he seemed. He was always in the background, pulling strings." Richard's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? What did Greg have to do with Clara's accident?" Lucy's eyes darkened. "He was the one who pushed her. Literally. Clara was never supposed to remember. The accident, it wasn't an accident, it was planned. And Emma." She paused, her voice trembling. "Emma was the key. They needed her memory gone. And they needed Clara to stay quiet. That's why I had to help her, Richard. That's why I had to get Clara away from Hill's reach." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you saying?" "Clara knew something." Lucy nodded slowly, her face etched with regret. She knew everything. And she was going to tell the world. But Greg couldn't let that happen. So he made sure she couldn't. He made sure Emma couldn't remember anything. They're both part of something much bigger. Something dangerous. Richard stepped closer, his voice steady but urgent. Where is Clara now? What happened to her? Lucy looked down at her hands. I don't know. After the accident I lost contact with her. She disappeared. But I know one thing. She didn't leave because she wanted to. She was taken, and I think she's still alive. Somewhere. Richard's mind was reeling. Clara was alive. That changed everything. The woman he had been searching for, the mother of the child he promised to protect, was still out there. But why hadn't she come forward? Why hadn't she reached out? Who took her? Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lucy looked up, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know for sure. But I think it was Greg. Or someone connected to him. Richard clenched his fists, his mind racing. Where do I find Clara? Lucy shook her head slowly. I don't know. But you need to be careful. Greg Hill has eyes everywhere. And if he knows you're looking for Clara, he'll stop at nothing to protect his secrets. Later that night, Richard sat in his car, parked a few miles away from the cabin. He had learned a lot, but the most important revelation was the one that haunted him. Clara was still alive. But she was out of reach, and if Greg Hill had his way, she would remain in the shadows forever. Richard called Daniel, his voice filled with determination. I need you to find out everything about Greg Hill's movements. I don't care how. I need to know where he's hiding Clara. I'll do my best. Daniel replied, his voice tinged with worry. But Richard, be careful. You're going up against a man with more power than you realize. I know. Richard said, his jaw tight. But I won't stop. Not now. The next day. Richard sat across from Emma at breakfast, his thoughts heavy with what he had learned. The weight of his promise to protect her pressed on his shoulders. He had told her that she was safe. But now, with the truth unfolding, he wasn't sure how long that safety would last. Mr. Cole, Emma's small voice pulled him from his thoughts. Richard looked at her, offering a small smile. Yes. Emma. I don't want to be afraid anymore. Emma said quietly, her eyes looking at him with trust. I want to remember. I want to know the truth. Richard's heart broke as he gazed at her. She had already been through so much. But the truth was a dangerous thing. And if she remembered, it could put both of them at risk. You're stronger than you know, Emma. Richard said softly. And I promise you, we'll find the truth together. But we need to be ready. This won't be easy. Emma nodded, a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. I trust you, Mr. Cole. Richard took her hand in his heart full of resolve. This wasn't just about solving a mystery. This was about protecting the one person who had changed his life forever. The morning sun shone through the windows of Richard's office, but the light felt cold. His thoughts were still wrapped around the conversation he had had with Lucy Hale. Every word she had spoken had made everything feel more real, more dangerous. Clara, Emma, Greg Hill, all tangled together in a mess that Richard couldn't untangle alone. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. He knew the risk, but the promise he had made to Emma echoed in his mind, he would find the truth. The phone on his desk rang, snapping him from his thoughts. It was Daniel. Mr. Cole, Daniel began, his voice clipped. I've got something. Greg Hill's been moving large sums of money to an offshore account. It's not just business transactions. He's hiding something. Richard's heart skipped a beat. Where's the money going? I don't have the full details yet, but it's linked to a private estate outside the city. The one where Clara's car crashed. Richard stood up abruptly. That's where I need to go. Get me the full information, Daniel. I'm going there now. I'll get it to you. But be careful, Daniel warned. Hill won't let you get close without a fight. I've come too far to back down now. Richard replied, his voice hard with resolve. Get me that information. An hour later, Richard was in his car, driving toward the estate. The roads were quiet. The air thick with the weight of what lay ahead. Every twist and turn on the narrow, winding path felt like a step deeper into something he couldn't control. His phone buzzed again. It was Daniel. I've sent you the address. Daniel said. The estate is isolated. You won't find much help out there. If Hill's hiding something, it's buried deep. Richard gripped the steering wheel tighter. I know. But I have to try. The estate came into view. A massive, old mansion surrounded by tall gates and thick trees. It looked abandoned, but Richard knew better. Nothing this well kept was left to rot in isolation. This place was hiding something, and he was determined to find out what. He parked his car a distance away, walking the final stretch on foot. The silence of the estate was unnerving. Not a single sound, no birds, no wind. Just the steady beat of his own heart in his chest. He reached the back of the mansion. Where the garden had been overrun with weeds and the stone path was cracked and forgotten. A small door at the back of the house caught his attention. It was slightly ajar, as if someone had left it open for him. Richard took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside, the air smelled of dust and decay. There were old portraits hanging on the walls. Faces of people he didn't recognize. The place had an eerie, untouched feel, as if time had stopped here. Richard moved carefully through the dark halls, every step echoing in the quiet. His mind was racing. Was Clara here? Was she hiding in one of these rooms? Or was this just another dead end? He passed a narrow corridor and stopped when he saw a door slightly cracked open. He didn't hesitate. He pushed it open fully and stepped inside. The room was small but well kept, filled with old furniture and boxes stacked in the corner. But it wasn't the room that caught his attention. It was the safe in the corner of the room. It was large, hidden behind a thick curtain. And there was something about it that screamed importance. Richard moved toward the safe, his pulse quickening. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. But he felt that whatever was in that safe would give him the answers he needed. He knelt down, examining the safe's lock. It was old. Mechanical. Not the modern digital locks he was used to. Richard ran his fingers over the surface, looking for any hint on how to open it. And then, he saw it. A small keyhole, tucked into the corner. 2 minutes later, Richard stood in the center of the room, the safe door open in front of him. His hands trembled as he sifted through the contents, papers, old files. Nothing that looked important at first glance. But then, a single photograph caught his eye. It was a picture of Clara, but there was more. In the background, a familiar figure stood, Greg Hill. His face was darkened, his expression unreadable. Richard's breath caught in his throat. This was it. This was the connection he had been searching for. Clara had been involved with Hill far more than he had imagined. The photograph was dated several years ago. But it was more than just a picture, it was evidence. It showed that Clara and Greg had been much closer than anyone had ever realized. The photograph alone couldn't explain everything. But it was enough to confirm that the truth was worse than he had feared. Richard quickly pocketed the photograph, determined to get back to Emma. But just as he turned to leave the room, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hallway. Suddenly, a voice called out from the shadows. Well, Richard Cole. I was wondering when you'd show up." Richard's heart dropped into his stomach. He knew that voice. It was Greg Hill. He turned slowly. Seeing Greg standing in the doorway, a smug expression on his face. "I had a feeling you'd find your way here," Greg said, his voice dripping with mockery. "But you should have known better. This is my world. You don't belong here." Richard's mind raced. He was caught. There was no easy way out. But he couldn't back down. Not now. Not when he was so close. "What have you done to Clara?" Richard demanded, his voice low and steady. Greg smirked. "Clara's nothing but a memory. And Emma. She's better off not remembering anything at all." Richard's fists clenched. "You won't get away with this." "I already have," Greg said with a cold laugh. "You should have stayed out of it, Richard. But now you're too far in. And you'll never get out." Richard stood his ground, refusing to show fear. "I'm not leaving until I find the truth. No matter what it costs." Greg's smile faded, replaced with a look of cold calculation. "Then you'll regret it." Just then, the sound of a car pulling up outside reached them. Greg's eyes flicked toward the door. "It's too late for you, Richard. You've made a dangerous enemy." Before Richard could react, Greg stepped back, disappearing into the shadows of the mansion. The silence returned. But the danger still lingered. Richard knew one thing now. He was no longer just fighting for Emma. He was fighting for everything he had built, everything he had lost, and everything that was still hidden in the darkness. The truth was close, but so was the danger. And Richard wasn't about to stop. The tension in the mansion's air was suffocating. Richard stood frozen in the center of the dimly lit room. The photograph of Clara and Greg Hill still clutched tightly in his hand. The sound of Greg's footsteps echoing down the hallway haunted him as the realization dawned. He was no longer just a CEO running a business. He was now caught in a dangerous web, and the only way out was through it. Greg's voice had echoed in his mind. "You'll regret it." Richard didn't know what Greg meant by that, but he had no time to waste. Every minute spent in this house put Emma at risk. Richard quickly scanned the room again, his mind running through possibilities. He had to get back to Emma, back to safety. But with Greg lurking in the shadows and no idea where Clara was, there was no guarantee of safety. Suddenly, a loud crash from downstairs broke the silence, followed by the sounds of hurried footsteps. Richard's pulse quickened. It was clear now. Greg knew he was here. And he was not about to let Richard leave without a fight. Richard moved swiftly, retracing his steps back down the narrow hallway. He had to get out. But he wasn't leaving without answers. He couldn't let Greg get away this time. As he reached the stairs, the front door slammed open. Two men in dark suits rushed in, their faces cold and expressionless. Greg Hill stood just behind them, smirking as he crossed his arms over his chest. "Going somewhere, Richard?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Richard didn't hesitate. He lunged for the nearest man, throwing a punch that landed hard in his stomach. The man staggered back, but the second one grabbed Richard by the arm, twisting it behind his back. "Let go of me," Richard gritted out, struggling against the firm grip. Greg stepped forward, his smirk widening. "I warned you. You should have stayed out of this, Cole. Now you've made it personal." The man holding Richard's arm tightened his grip, causing him to wince in pain. But Richard wasn't about to give up. He had come too far to back down now. With a surge of strength, Richard twisted his body, breaking free from the man's grasp. He moved quickly, spinning around and knocking the other man to the ground. But before he could take another step, Greg's voice rang out. "Nof!" Greg shouted. "Don't you get it, Richard? You're nothing but a pawn. You always have been." Richard's heart pounded as he faced Greg, his fists raised. "I'm no one's pawn. I've been fighting for what's right. Something you've never understood." Greg chuckled darkly. "You think you're saving Emma? You think you're saving Clara? You're too late. They were never going to be saved." Richard's gaze hardened. "What did you do to Clara?" Greg's smile faltered. "Clara's gone. You should have known that. She was a liability. And as for Emma," he paused, his expression darkening. "She's part of something bigger than you can ever imagine. But you're about to learn just how deep this goes." Just then, a loud crash came from outside, followed by the screeching of tires. Richard turned toward the noise, his instincts kicking in. Someone else was here. Someone unexpected. "Hold him," Greg ordered, his voice sharp. "We'll finish this now." Before Richard could react, the men closed in, grabbing him again. But just as the tension reached its peak, the door to the mansion exploded open with a loud bang, and a familiar figure rushed in. "Richard." It was Daniel, his face tense and angry. He held a gun in his hand, the barrel pointed directly at Greg Hill. "Let him go now," Daniel demanded. Greg's face twisted with fury as he saw the gun. "You think you can stop me, Daniel?" "I think I already have," Daniel replied, his voice calm but steady. "I've already called the authorities." "You're finished, Hill." Greg's eyes flicked toward the door as if considering his options. "This isn't over," he spat. "You don't know what you're dealing with. You're done," Daniel said again, his finger tight on the trigger. "The game's over." Greg hesitated, then cursed under his breath. "You think you've won. You have no idea what I'm capable of." But it was too late. The sound of sirens grew louder outside. The authorities were closing in. Richard exhaled a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The danger wasn't over yet, but for the first time, he could feel the weight lifting off his shoulders. Greg Hill was finally cornered. The lies, the manipulation, the danger. It was all coming to an end. He turned to Daniel, gratitude and relief flooding his chest. You came through. Daniel lowered the gun, his face still grim. I wasn't going to let you do this alone. Now we've got to finish this. Once the police get here, Hill's going down for good. Minutes later. The sound of police cars filling the driveway filled the air. Officers swarmed the mansion, quickly arresting Greg Hill and his men. Richard stood outside. His arms crossed, watching as the man who had caused so much pain was finally taken into custody. But even as Greg was led away in handcuffs, Richard couldn't help but wonder, was it over? Was this really the end? Is it really done? Richard asked quietly. Daniel looked at him. His expression unreadable. Not quite. There's still a lot we don't know. But this is a big step. And we'll get the rest of the answers. Back at the mansion. Richard found Emma waiting for him. Her eyes were filled with worry, but when she saw him, a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. I'm glad you're back, she whispered, her voice soft but full of trust. Richard knelt down in front of her, gently lifting her chin. I promised you, Emma. We're going to find out the truth. And I'm going to protect you. Always. Emma nodded, her eyes shining with hope. I know. You're not going to leave me. Richard smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Never. The night was quiet after Greg Hill's arrest. But inside Richard's heart there was no peace. He sat in his study staring at the fire burning slowly in the fireplace. Emma was asleep upstairs, her small breath soft and steady, but Richard's mind refused to rest. He had stopped Greg, yes. But stopping him was only half the battle. There were still too many unanswered questions. Clara was still missing. Emma's memory was still gone. And the picture Richard had found, the one showing Clara and Greg together, burned in his mind like a scar. Why were Clara and Greg together? What had happened that night of her accident? And why was Emma left all alone? Richard pressed his hand against his forehead. For years, his life had been about contracts and boardrooms, where every answer could be found in numbers and logic. But this was different. This was human, raw, and painful. And the answers were hidden behind secrets that people wanted to bury forever. The next morning, Richard sat with Daniel over breakfast. The sun was rising, but neither man seemed to notice. Greg won't talk. Daniel said, his voice low. The police are holding him, but he keeps repeating the same thing. Clara is gone. Nothing else. Richard frowned. He knows more. He was involved from the beginning. He wouldn't have gone through so much trouble unless Emma was connected to something bigger. Daniel sipped his coffee, his eyes tired. We have to consider the possibility that Clara might not be alive. Richard slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. No. I don't believe that, I can't. Emma deserves the truth. She deserves her mother. Daniel looked at him quietly. He knew Richard wasn't speaking only for Emma. Richard himself had started to need Clara's presence, her answers, her truth. Upstairs, Emma slowly walked down the steps, rubbing her eyes. She looked smaller than ever in her oversized pajamas. Good morning, she whispered, her voice weak. Richard softened instantly. Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well? Emma nodded, but her face was troubled. She hesitated before sitting at the table. I had a dream, she said slowly. Richard leaned closer. What kind of dream? Emma's little hands trembled. I saw a car. It was dark. There was fire and a woman screaming. I think it was my mom. Richard's chest tightened. Daniel set his cup down, watching Emma carefully. Emma, Richard said gently. Do you remember anything else? Any faces, names, places? Emma shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. No, just the screaming. And then I woke up. Richard pulled her close and wrapped his arms around her. It's okay. You're safe now. We'll figure it out together. Later that day, Richard decided to visit the hospital where Clara's accident had been recorded. He wanted answers. The truth couldn't stay hidden forever. The hospital staff was hesitant at first, but Richard's name carried weight. Finally, a nurse brought out an old file. This is what we have. The nurse said quietly. Clara Miller was brought here late at night after a car accident. She was badly injured. But then she was transferred. No one ever came back for her. Richard's heart pounded. Transferred. To where? The nurse shook her head. The file doesn't say. It just stops. Like someone erased the rest of the record. Richard clenched his jaw. Someone had covered their tracks. And that someone was powerful enough to make an entire hospital record disappear. 2. When Richard returned home, Emma was waiting for him in the living room. She ran to him, holding his hand tightly. "Where were you?" she asked, her eyes wide with worry. "I was looking for your mom," Richard said softly. "I promise you, Emma, I won't stop until I find her." Emma hugged him tightly, her small arms around his waist. "I don't want to lose you too," she whispered. Richard closed his eyes, his throat heavy with emotion. "You won't. I'm here. Always." That night, as Richard prepared for bed, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A voice whispered on the other end. "If you want to find Clara Miller, come alone tomorrow night. Old River Bridge. Midnight. Don't bring the police." The line went dead. Richard's heart stopped. Someone knew where Clara was. Someone was watching. The danger wasn't over. It was only beginning again. The night was colder than Richard had anticipated as he made his way to Old River Bridge. The wind howled through the trees. And the river below flowed dark and unforgiving. His mind raced with thoughts of Emma, of Clara, and of the mystery he was about to face. He had no idea what to expect, but one thing was clear. Whoever was behind all this wanted him alone. He wasn't sure why, but he'd come this far. He wasn't backing down now. He glanced around. His breath visible in the frigid air. The bridge stretched out before him, its weathered wooden planks creaking with every step he took. The moonlight was faint, casting shadows over the narrow path. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. Richard's heart skipped a beat. It was a woman, her silhouette hidden beneath a dark coat, her face partially obscured by the shadows. "Who are you?" Richard asked, his voice steady but tense. The woman stepped forward, her face coming into view. It was Clara. Richard's breath caught in his throat. She looked different. Her eyes were tired, her hair disheveled, but it was unmistakably her. "Clara," Richard whispered, his voice trembling. She took a step closer, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Richard. I'm sorry. I never wanted you to get involved." Richard shook his head, still in shock. "Where have you been? Why didn't you?" Clara cut him off with a sad smile. "I had to disappear. For Emma's safety. For both of yours." Richard frowned. Confusion clouding his mind. "But, why? What happened to you? Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Clara looked away. The weight of her secrets heavy on her shoulders. "Greg Hill, he was never who he seemed. I trusted him once. But he wasn't just a businessman, he had other plans. Dangerous ones. And when I realized the truth, I knew I had to get out. I couldn't put Emma in danger. I couldn't put anyone in danger." Richard's mind spun. What truth? What did Greg have to do with Emma? Clara's eyes filled with tears. Emma was part of his plan. She wasn't just a child. She was supposed to be the key to something. I didn't know what at the time. But I knew it was wrong. When I tried to escape, he tried to kill me. Richard stepped back, disbelief flooding his chest. "Kill you?" Clara nodded. "It was an accident. But I barely made it out. I had to go into hiding, leave everything behind. I couldn't risk Greg finding me, or Emma. He thought if he kept me quiet, he could control everything. He thought Emma was the key to whatever he was planning." Richard's heart ached as he processed her words. "You knew where Emma was all this time?" Clara nodded slowly, her voice breaking. "I did. But I couldn't risk contacting her. I couldn't risk bringing that danger into her life again." Richard felt a mixture of relief and anger. "But you should have trusted me. You should have let me help you." Clara's face softened with regret. "I know. I was wrong. But I thought you'd be in danger too. I didn't want to drag you into this." Just then, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the tense silence. Richard's heart raced as he looked toward the bridge entrance. Clara froze, her face pale. "We don't have much time," she whispered urgently. Greg isn't far behind. Richard grabbed her hand. We need to go now. As they turned to leave, the sound of cars pulling up to the bridge made Richard's heart drop. He had no idea how Greg had found them. But he wasn't about to let Clara or Emma be put in harm's way again. They made it to the car, just as the first of Greg's men appeared from the shadows. Richard slammed the door shut, and the driver floored the accelerator. They sped away from the bridge, the cold wind rushing past the windows. Richard looked at Clara. His expression firm. You're safe now. I'm not letting him hurt you or Emma again. We'll figure this out. Together. Clara nodded silently, her hand resting on the window as she looked back at the fading bridge. The next day, Clara agreed to meet with the authorities. Greg Hill's criminal empire had been exposed, and his plans for control were now in ruins. With the help of the police, Clara finally came forward. And the truth about her disappearance was revealed to the public. Greg and his men were arrested, and the danger was officially over. But even as the storm cleared, Richard knew that things would never be the same. The journey had been long, and the wounds, emotional and physical, would take time to heal. Back at the mansion, Richard sat on the couch, watching Emma play with her toys. She was laughing now, something Richard had longed to hear for months. She was finally starting to smile again. Clara entered the room, standing in the doorway. She watched them, a soft smile on her face. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. Richard stood up and walked over to her, his heart full. You don't have to thank me, Clara. I promised Emma I'd take care of her. I promised her I wouldn't leave, and I didn't. Clara's eyes softened as she reached out to touch his arm. I know. You kept your word. And that means more than you'll ever know. Richard nodded, his gaze shifting to Emma, who was looking up at them with innocent curiosity. We've still got a long way to go. But we'll do it together. Clara smiled, her voice barely a whisper. Together. As Richard watched Emma play, he realized something he hadn't fully understood before. Family wasn't just blood. It was the bonds you chose to form, the promises you kept, and the love you shared. And right now, that was all that mattered. If you enjoyed this story and want more emotional, heart-touching tales, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Like this video if it resonated with you, and leave a comment telling me how you would feel in Richard's shoes! If you know someone who needs to hear this story, make sure to share it with them. Your support means the world to me. Thank you so much for your valuable time. I really appreciate you being here. Stay tuned for more, and don't forget, together, we're creating something special.